Again, I am doing the only thing that cheers me up, which is to read speeches of Winston Churchill for YouTube. This one is from the Wilderness Years, 1930 to 1939, titled A Total and Unmitigated Defeat, 5th of October, 1938, delivered to the House of Commons. The italics, this is going to be longer. I'm just going to read until I run out of steam. From 171 of this wonderful edition. On the 1st of October, this is the italics. On the 1st of October, Chamberlain returned to an ecstatic public reception in London following his meeting with Hitler in Munich, brandishing his now infamous scrap of paper with Hitler's signature and his own, pledging that Britain and Germany would never again go to war. Churchill's damning speech struck a jarring note that stood in stark contrast to the praise being lavished upon Chamberlain in Parliament, the press, and the nation. At this point, Churchill could number his political allies in the House on the fingers of one hand. If I do not begin this afternoon by paying the usual and indeed almost inevitable tributes to the Prime Minister for his handling of this crisis, it is certainly not from any lack of personal regard. We have always, over a great many years, had very pleasant relations, and I have deeply understood from personal experiences, my own in a similar crisis, the stress and strain he has had to bear. But I am sure it is much better to say exactly what we think about public affairs, and this is certainly not the time when it is worth anyone's while to court political popularity. We had a shining example of firmness of character from the First Lord of the Admiralty 2 days ago. He showed that firmness of character which is utterly unmoved by currents of opinion, however swift and violent they may be. My honourable friend and member of South West Hull, Mr. Law, to whose compulsive speech the House listened on Monday, which I had not the good fortune to hear, but which I read, and which I am assured by all who heard it, revived the memory of his famous father, so cherished in this house, and made us feel that his gifts did not die with him, was quite right in reminding us that the Prime Minister has himself throughout his conduct of these matters shown a robust indifference to cheers or boos, and to the alterations of criticism and applause. If that be so, such qualities and elevation of mind should make it possible for the most severe expressions of honest opinion to be interchanged in this house without rupturing personal relations, and for all points of view to receive the fullest possible expression. Having thus fortified myself by the example of others, I will proceed to emulate them. I will therefore begin by saying the most unpopular and most unwelcome thing. I will begin by saying what everybody would like to ignore or forget, but which must nevertheless be stated, namely, that we have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat, and that France has suffered even more than we have. This is 1938, I think. 1938. And then Viscountess Astor interchimes, "Nonsense, nonsense." Mr. Churchill again talks. When the noble lady cries, "Nonsense," she could not have heard the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Sir John Simon, admit in his illuminating and comprehensive speech just now that Herr Hitler had gained in this particular leap forward, in substance, all he set out to gain. The utmost, my honorable friend, the Prince Minister has been able to secure by all his immense exertions, by all the great efforts and mobilizations which took place in this country, and by all the anguish and strain through which we have passed in this country, the utmost he has been able to gain. Honorable members, in peace, I thought I might be allowed to make that point in its due place, and I propose to deal with it. The utmost he has been able to gain for Czechoslovakia, and in the matters which were in dispute, has been that the German dictator, instead of snatching his victuals from the table, has been content to have them served to him course by course. The Chancellor of the Exchequer said it was the first time Herr Hitler had been made to retract. I think that was the word, retract, in any degree. We really must not waste time after all this long debate upon the difference between the positions reached at the Berchtesgaden, in Godesberg, and in Munich. They can be very similarly epitomized, if the House will permit me to vary the metaphor. £1 was demanded at the pistol's point. When it was given, £2 were demanded at the pistol's point. Finally, the dictator consented to take £1, 17 shingles and 6 pence, and the rest in promises of goodwill for the future. Now I come to the point, which was mentioned to me just now from some quarters of the House, about the saving of peace. No one has been a more resolute and uncompromising struggler for peace than the Prime Minister. Everyone knows that. Never has there been such intense and undaunted determination to maintain and to secure peace. That is quite true. Nevertheless, I am not quite clear why there was so much danger of Great Britain or France being involved in a war with Germany at this juncture if, in fact, they were ready to all along to sacrifice Czechoslovakia. The terms which the Prime Minister brought back with him, I quite agree. At the last moment, everything had got off the rails and nothing but this intervention could have saved the peace. But I am talking of the events of the summer. Could easily have been agreed, I believe, through the ordinary diplomatic channels at any time during the summer. And I will say this, that I believe the Czechs, left to themselves and told they were going to get no help from the Western powers, would have been able to make better terms than they got. They could hardly have worse, after all this tremendous perturbation. There never can be any resolute certainty that there will be a fight if one side is determined that it will give way completely. When one reads the Munich terms, when one sees what is happening in Czechoslovakia from hour to hour, when one is sure, I will not say of parliamentary approval, but of parliamentary acquiescence, when the Chancellor of the Exchequer makes a speech at which, at any rate, tries to put in a very powerful and persuasive manner the fact that, after all, it was inevitable, and indeed righteous, right, when we saw all this, and everyone on this side of the House, including many members of the Conservative Party who are supposed to be vigilant and careful guardians of the national interest, it is quite clear that nothing vitally affecting us was at stake. It seems to me that one must ask, what was all the trouble and fuss about? The resolve was taken by the British and the French governments. Let me say that it is very important to realize that it is by no means a question which the British government only had to decide, which the British government only had to decide, I very much admire the manner in which in the House all references of recriminatory nature have been repressed. But it must be realized that this resolve did not emanate particularly from one or other of the governments, but was a resolve which both must share in common responsibility. When this resolve was taken, and the course was followed, you may say it was wise or unwise, prudent or short-sighted. Once it had been decided not to make the defense of Czechoslovakia a matter of war, then there was really no reason, if the matter had been handled during the summer in the ordinary way, to call into being all this formidable apparatus of crisis. I think that point should be considered. We are asking to vote for this motion, quote, that this House approves the policy of His Majesty's government by which war was averted in the recent crisis and supports their efforts to secure a lasting peace, which has been put upon the paper. And it is certainly a motion couched in very uncontroversial terms, as indeed in the amendment moved from the opposition side. I cannot myself express my agreement with the steps which have been taken, and as the Chancellor of l'Exchequer has put his side of the case with so much ability, I will attempt, if I may be permitted, to put the case from a different angle. I have always held the view that the maintenance of peace depends upon the accumulation of deterrence against the aggressor, coupled with a sincere effort to redress grievances. Herr Hitler's victory, like so many of the famous struggles that have governed the fate of the world, was won upon the narrowest of margins. After the seizure of Austria in March, we faced this problem in our debates. I ventured to appeal to the government to go a little further than the Prime Minister went, and to give a pledge that in conjunction with France and other powers, they would guarantee the security of Czechoslovakia while the Sudetendeutsch question was being examined either by a League of Nations, commissioned, or some other impartial body. And I still believe that if that course had been followed, events would not have fallen into this disastrous state. I agree very much with my right honorable friend, the member of Sparkbrook, Mr. Amory, when he said on that occasion, I can remember his actual words, quote, "Do one thing or the other. Either say you will disinterest yourself in the matter altogether, or take the step of giving a guarantee which will have the greatest chance of securing protection for that country." France and Great Britain together, especially if they had maintained a close contact with Russia, which certainly was not done, would have been able in those days in the summer, when they had the prestige, to influence many of the smaller states of Europe. And I believe they could have determined the attitude of Poland. Such a combination, prepared at a time when the German dictator was not deeply and irrevocably committed to his new adventure, would, I believe, have given strength to all those forces in Germany which resisted this departure, this new design. They were varying forces, those of a military character which declared that Germany was not ready to undertake a world war, and all that mass of moderate opinion and popular opinion which dreaded war, and some elements of which still have some influence upon the German government. Such action would have given strength to all that intense desire for peace, which the helpless German masses share with their British and French fellow men, and which, as we have been reminded, found a passionate and rarely permitted vent in the joyous manifestation with which the Prime Minister was acclaimed in Munich. All these forces added to other deterrents, which combination of powers, great and small, ready to stand firm upon the front. Sorry, I'm losing the thread. Let me start over. All these forces, added to the other deterrents, which combinations of powers, great and small, ready to stand firm upon the front of law, and for the ordered remedy of grievances, would have formed, might well have been effective. Of course, you cannot say for certain they would. Interruption. People are growing tired with Churchill, just as I'm growing tired with reading it a little bit. It's a little challenging to render all this, right? I haven't actually read this speech before, but it looked like a good one. I try to argue fairly with the House. At the same time, I do not think it is fair to charge those who wished to see this course followed, and followed consistently and resolutely, with having wished for an immediate war. Between submission and immediate war there was this third alternative, which gave a hope not only of peace but of justice. It is quite true that such a policy, in order to succeed, demanded that Britain should declare straight out, and a long time beforehand, that she would, with others, join to defend Czechoslovakia against an unprovoked aggression. His Majesty's government refused to give that guarantee, when it would have saved the situation. Yet in the end they gave it when it was too late, and now for the future they renew it, when they have not the slightest power to make it good. All is over. Silent, mournful, abandoned, broken, Czechoslovakia recedes into the darkness. She has suffered in every respect by her association with the Western democracies and with the League of Nations, of which she has always been an obedient servant. She has suffered in particular from her association with France, under whose guidance and policy she has been actuated for so long. The very measures taken by His Majesty's government in the Anglo-French agreement to give her the best chance possibly, namely the 50% clean cut in certain districts instead of a plebiscite, have turned to her detriment, because there is to be a plebiscite, too, in wide areas, and those other powers who had claims have also come down upon the helpless victim. Those municipal elections upon whose voting the basis is taken for the 50% cut were held on issues which had nothing to do with joining Germany. When I saw Herr Heinlein over here, he assured me that was not the desire of his people. Positive statements were made that it was only a question of home rule, of having a position of their own in the Czechoslovakian state. No one has a right to say that the plebiscite, which is to be taken in areas under SAR conditions, and the clean cut of the 50% areas, that those two operations together amount to the slightest degree of a verdict of self-determination. It is a fraud and a farce to invoke that name, naming it SAR, S-A-A-R, I think. We in this country, as in other liberal and democratic countries, have a perfect right to exalt the principle of self-determination. But it comes ill out of the mouths of those in totalitarian states who deny even the smallest element of toleration to every section and creed within their bounds. But however you put it, this particular block of land, this mass of human beings to be handed over, has never expressed the desire to go into the Nazi rule. I do not believe that even now, if their opinion could be asked, they would exercise such an option. What is the remaining position of Czechoslovakia? Not only are they politically mutilated, but economically and financially they are in complete confusion. Their banking, their railway arrangements are severed and broken. Their industries are curtailed, and the movement of their population is most cruel. The Sudeten miners, who are all Czechs, and whose families have lived in that area for centuries, must now flee into an area where there are hardly any mines left for them to work. It is a tragedy which has occurred. I did not like to hear the Minister of Transport yesterday talking about Humpty Dumpty. It was the Minister of Transport who was saying that it was a case of Humpty Dumpty, that could never be put together again. There must always be a most profound regret and a sense of vexation in British hearts at the treatment and misfortunes which have overcome the Czechoslovakian Republic. They have not ended here. At any moment there may be a hitch in the program. At any moment there may be an order for Herr Goebbels to start again his propaganda of calumny and lies. At any moment an incident may be provoked. And now that the fortress line is given away, what is there to stop the will of the conqueror? It is too serious a subject to treat lightly. Obviously we are not in a position to give them the slightest help at the present time, except what everyone is glad to know has been done. The financial aid which the government has promptly produced. I venture to think that in future the Czechoslovak state cannot be maintained as an independent entity. You will find that in a period of time which may be measured by years, but may be measured only by months, Czechoslovakia will be engulfed in the Nazi regime. Perhaps they may join in despair or in revenge. At any rate, that story is over and told. But we cannot consider the abandonment and ruin of Czechoslovakia in the light only of what happened only last month. It is the most grievous consequence which we have experienced of what we have done and of what we have left undone in the last 5 years. 5 years of futile good intention, 5 years of eager search started in the line of least resistance, 5 years of uninterrupted retreat of British power, 5 years of neglect of our air defences. Those are the features which I stand here to declare, and which marked an improvident stewardship from which Great Britain and France have dearly to pay. They have been reduced in those 5 years from a position of security so overwhelming and so unchallengeable that we never cared to think about it. We have been reduced from a position where the very word war was considered one which would be used only by persons qualifying for a lunatic asylum. We have been reduced from a position of safety and power, power to do good, power to be generous to a beaten foe, power to make terms with Germany, power to give her proper redress for her grievances, power to stop her arming if we chose, power to take any step in strength or mercy or justice which we thought right, reduced in 5 years from a position of safe and unchallenged to where we stand now. When I think of the fair hopes of a long peace which still lay before Europe at the beginning of 1933, when Herr Hitler first obtained power, and of all the opportunities of arresting the growth of the Nazi power which have been thrown away, when I think of the immense combinations and resources which have been neglected or squandered, I cannot believe that a parallel exists in the whole course of history. So far as this country is concerned, the responsibility must rest with those who have the undisputed control of our political affairs. They neither prevented Germany from rearming, nor did they rearm ourselves in time. They quarreled with Italy without saving Ethiopia. They exploited and discredited the vast institution of the League of Nations, and they neglected to make alliances and combinations which might have repaired previous errors. And thus they left us in the hour of trial without adequate national defense or effective international security. In my holiday I thought it was a chance to study the reign of King Ethelred the Unready. The House will remember that it was a period of great misfortune in which, from the strong position which we had gained under the descendants of King Alfred, we fell very swiftly into chaos. It was the period of Danegeld and of foreign pressure. I must say that the rugged words of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written 1,000 years ago, seem to me not opposite, but apposite. At least as apposite as those quotations from Shakespeare, which we have been regaled by the last speaker from the opposite bench, the opposition bench. Here is what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle said, and I think the words apply very much to our treatment of Germany and our relations with her. Quote, "All these calamities fell upon us because of evil counsel, because tribute was not offered to them at the right time, nor yet were they resisted. But when they had done the most evil, then was peace made with them." That is the wisdom of the past, for all wisdom is not new wisdom. I have ventured to express those views in justifying myself for not being able to support the motion which is moved tonight. But I recognize that this great matter of Czechoslovakia and of British and French duty there has passed into history. New developments may come along, but we are not here to decide whether any of those steps should be taken or not. They have been taken. They have been taken by those who had a right to take them because they bore the highest executive responsibility under the Crown. Whatever we may think of it, we must regard those steps as belonging to the category of affairs which are settled beyond recall. The past is no more, and one can only draw comfort if one feels that one has done one's best to advise rightly and wisely and in good time. I, therefore, turn to the future and to our situation as it is today. Here again I am sure I shall have to say something which will not be at all welcome. We are in the presence of a disaster of the first magnitude which has befallen Great Britain and France. Do not let us blind ourselves to that. It must now be accepted that all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe will make the best terms they can with the triumphant Nazi power. The system of alliances in Central Europe, upon which France has relied for her safety, has been swept away, and I can see no means by which it can be reconstituted. The road down the Danube Valley to the Black Sea, the resources of corn and oil, the road which leads as far as Turkey, has been opened. In fact, if not in form, it seems to me that all those countries of Middle Europe, all those Danubian countries, will, one after another, be drawn into this vast system of power politics. Not only power military politics, but power economic politics, radiating from Berlin. And I believe this can be achieved quite smoothly and swiftly, and will not necessarily entail the firing of a single shot. You will see day after day, week after week, entire alienation of those regions. Many of those countries, in fear of the rise of the Nazi power, have already got politicians, ministers, governors who were pro-German. But there was always an enormous popular movement in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia, which looked to the Western democracies and loathed the idea of having this arbitrary rule of the totalitarian system thrust upon them, and hoped that a stand would be made. All that has gone by the board. We are talking about countries which are a long way off, and of which, as the Prime Minister might say, we know nothing. The noble lady says that very harmless allusion is, this Countess asked her, rude. Mr. Churchill, speaking again. She must very recently have been receiving her finishing course in manners. What will be the position, I want to know, of France and England this year and the year afterwards? What will be the position of the Western Front, on which we are in full authority the guarantors? The German army at the present time is more numerous than that of France, though not nearly so matured or perfected. Next year it will grow much larger, and its maturity will be more complete. Relieved from all anxiety in the East, and having secured resources which will greatly diminish, if not entirely remove, the deterrent of a naval blockade, the rulers of Nazi Germany will have a free choice open to them in what direction they will turn their eyes. If the Nazi dictator should choose to look westward, as he may, bitterly will France and England regret the loss of that fine army of ancient Bohemia, which was estimated last week to require not fewer than 30 German divisions for its destruction. Can we blind ourselves to the great change which has taken place in the military situation, and to the dangers we have to meet? We are in process, I believe, of adding in 4 years 4 battalions to the British Army. No fewer than 2 have already been completed. Here are at least 30 divisions which must now be taken into consideration upon the French front, besides the 12 that were captured when Austria was engulfed. Many people, no doubt, honestly believe that they are only giving away the interests of Czechoslovakia, whereas I fear we shall find that we have deeply compromised, and perhaps finally endangered, the safety and even the independence of Great Britain and France. This is not merely a question of giving up the German colonies, as I am sure we shall be asked to do, nor is it a question only of losing influence in Europe. It goes far deeper than that. You have to consider that the character of the Nazi movement and the rule which it implies. You have to consider the character of the Nazi movement and the rule which it implies. The Prime Minister desires to see cordial relations between this country and Germany. There is no difficulty at all in having cordial relations with the German people. Our hearts go out to them, but they have no power. You must have diplomatic and correct relations, but there can never be friendship between the British democracy and the Nazi power, the power which spurns Christian ethics, which cheers its onward course by a barbarous paganism, which vaunts the spirit of aggression and conquest, which derives strength and perverted pleasure from persecution, and uses, as we have seen, with pitiless brutality the threat of murderous force. That power cannot ever be the trusted friend of the British democracy. What I find unendurable is the sense of our country falling into the power, into the orbit and influence of Nazi Germany, and of our existence becoming dependent upon their goodwill or pleasure. It is to prevent that I have tried my best to urge the maintenance of every bulwark of defense. First, the timely creation of the Air Force, superior to anything within striking distance of our shores. Secondly, the gathering together of the collective strength of many nations. And thirdly, the making of alliances and military conventions, all within the covenant, in order to gather together forces at any rate to restrain the onward movement of this power. It has all been in vain. Every position has successively undermined and abandoned on specious and plausible excuses. We do not want to be led upon the high road to becoming a satellite to the German Nazi system of European domination. In a very few years, perhaps in a very few months, we shall be confronted with demands which we shall no doubt be invited to comply. Those demands may affect the surrender of territory, the surrender of liberty. I foresee and foretell that the policy of submission will carry with it restrictions upon the freedom of speech and debate in Parliament, on public platforms and discussion in the press. For it will be said, indeed, I hear it said sometimes now, that we cannot allow the Nazi system of dictatorship to be criticized by ordinary common English politicians. Then, with a press under control, in part direct, but more potently indirect, with every organ of public opinion doped and chloroformed into acquiescence, we shall be conducted along further stages of our journey. I have been casting about to see how measures can be taken to protect us from this advance of the Nazi power, and to secure those forms of life which are so dear to us. What is the sole method that is open? The sole method that is open for us is to regain our old island independence by acquiring that supremacy in the air which we were promised, that security in our air defenses which we were assured we had, and thus to make ourselves an island once again. That, in all this grim outlook, shines out as the overwhelming fact. An effort at rearmament, the likes of which has not been seen, ought to be made forthwith, and all the resources of this country and all its united strength should be bent to the task. I was very glad to see that Lord Baldwin yesterday in the House of Lords said that he would mobilize industry tomorrow. But I think it would have been much better if Lord Baldwin had said that 2.5 years ago, when everyone demanded a Ministry of Supply. I will venture to say to honorable gentlemen sitting here behind the government bench, honorable friends of mine, whom I thank for the patience with which they have listened to what I have to say, that they have some responsibility for all this too, because if they had given one tithe of the cheers they have lavished upon this transaction of Czechoslovakia and to the small band of members who are endeavoring to get timely rearmament set in motion, we should not now be in the position in which we are. Honorable gentlemen opposite, and honorable members of the liberal benches, are not entitled to throw these stones. I remember for 2 years having to face not only the government's deprecation, but their stern disapproval. Lord Baldwin has now given the signal, tardy though it may be. Let us at least obey it. After all, there are no secrets now about what happened in the air, and in the mobilization of our anti-aircraft defenses. These matters have been, as my honorable and gallant friend, the members of the Abbe Division said, seen by thousands of people. They can form their own opinions of the character of the statements which have been persistently made to us by ministers on this subject. Who pretends now that there is air parity with Germany? Who pretends now that our anti-aircraft defenses were adequately manned or armed? We may know that the German General Staff are well informed upon these subjects, but the House of Commons has hitherto not taken seriously its duty of requiring to assure itself on these matters. The House Secretary, Sir Samuel Hoare, said the other night that he would welcome investigation. Many things have been done which reflect the greatest credit upon the administration, but the vital matters are what we want to know about. I have asked again and again during these 3 years for a secret session where these matters could be thrashed out, or for an investigation by a select committee of the House, or for some other method. I ask now that when we meet again in the autumn, that that should be a matter on which the government should take the House into its confidence, because we have a right to know where we stand and what measures are being taken to secure our position. I do not grudge our loyal, brave people, who were ready to do their duty no matter what the cost, who never flinched under the strain of the last week. I do not grudge them the natural, spontaneous outburst of joy and relief when they learned that the hard ordeal would no longer be required of them at the moment. But they should know the truth. They should know that there has been great neglect and deficiency in our defenses. They should know that we have sustained a defeat without a war, the consequences of which will travel far with us along our road. They should know that we have passed an awful milestone in our history, when the whole equilibrium of Europe has been deranged, and that the terrible words have for the time been pronounced against the Western democracies. Quote, "Thou art weighted in the balance, and found wanting." And I do not suspect that this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first step, the first foretaste of a bitter cup, which will be proffered to us year by year, unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor we arise again and take our stand for freedom as in the olden time. Yeah. That's some good Churchill. Anyway, thanks for listening, YouTube.